So again, very good morning to all of you. I hope you all can hear me clearly. So today our topic of discussion is vaccine preventable diseases. Okay. So there are lots of diseases for which effective vaccines are available. I mean, there are lots of vaccine preventable diseases, but today we will be discussing some of them. I mean, 3 of them. That is diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. Okay. So vaccine preventable diseases, as the name suggests, these are the diseases for which some effective vaccines are available. Okay. And when these vaccines are administered to an individual, that vaccine can help prevent the primary disease to a certain extent. Okay. Although none of the vaccines are 100% effective, okay, the protective efficacy of vaccines differ from vaccine to vaccine, and it depends upon various factors. So none of the vaccines are 100% effective. I mean, if you have taken a vaccine for a particular disease, that doesn't mean that doesn't give you 100% protection against the disease. Okay. So efficacy varies from vaccine to vaccine. Some have 60% protective efficacy, some have 70% efficacy, some have 80% efficacy. Okay. So depending upon various factors, the efficacy also changes. Okay. But again, if these vaccines are given widespread in like community level, then these vaccines can prevent transmission of disease from person to person, and at community level it can help in like decreasing the incidence of these diseases. Okay. So none of the vaccines are 100% effective. Like अभी कोरोना वैक्सीन्स का ट्रायल शुरू हुआ है, तो जैसे ही न्यूज़ आया कि कोरोना वैक्सीन का ट्रायल शुरू हो गया है, ह्यूमन ट्रायल एंड ऑल, लोग इतने खुश हो रहे हैं जैसे कि लाइक कोरोना वैक्सीन आने के बाद किसी को कोरोना होगा ही नहीं. ऐसा नहीं है. उसका डिपेंड करता है उसका एफिकेसी क्या है, उसका लाइक जो इम्यूनिटी कितने दिन लास्ट करता है, एंड उसके उसके ऊपर डिपेंड करता है. सो अभी तक जो भी स्टडीज आए हैं, आई एम टॉकिंग कोरोना वैक्सीन, जो भी उसका डेटाज आए हैं, सो उसका जो इम्यूनिटी होता है बाय आइदर नेचुरल इन्फेक्शन और वैक्सीन से, तो दैट लास्ट फॉर हार्डली 90 days. Okay. So after 90 days the immunoglobulin levels starts declining, and the protective efficacy also declines. So after 90 days there is a chance of reinfection also. Okay. So my point is that not all the vaccines are 100% effective, and if you have taken the vaccine, that doesn't mean that you are 100% safe. Okay. So today we will be discussing diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. In my last class, while discussing fever with rash, I had discussed some diseases like measles, rubella, and chickenpox, and those diseases also. So am I audible? Okay. Okay, thank you. So I had discussed measles, rubella, and chickenpox. So those diseases also comes under vaccine preventable diseases, because those diseases, I mean, some effective vaccines are available against those diseases. Okay. So today we will discuss diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. Initially I thought of discussing polio as well, I mean acute flaccid paralysis, but I thought giving this limited time, 1 hour time, I thought it will be lengthy. So I skip it. Okay. So first coming to diphtheria. So diphtheria comes from a Greek word, that is diphtheri, which means skin or hide. Okay. We will discuss why the meaning is so. And first coming to etiopathogenesis, it is a bacterial disease caused by Corynebacterium diphtheri. Okay. And Corynebacterium diphtheri, as you all know, is a gram-positive club-shaped slender bacilli, which produces a powerful exotoxin. Okay. And it has 4 biotypes, that is Graves, Matrice, Intermedius, and Belfanti. And the pathogenesis of this disease, diphtheria, is due to the exotoxin and a cell wall component of the bacteria. Okay, mainly due to the exotoxin. Okay, the exotoxin causes local and systemic cell destruction. Okay. Usually, we see that the portal of entry is your respiratory tract. It is transmitted by respiratory droplets, and when it enters the respiratory tract, it multiplies in your respiratory epithelium, in your pharynx, larynx, or in your trachea, and this exotoxin, which is released by the bacteria, damages the local your epithelial cells. Okay, and it has a high case fatality rate of around of more than 10% in endemic areas. Okay, still, and it is the transmission is by person to person spread by droplet infection, which is airborne, or by direct contact with respiratory secretions, or rarely through discharges from the skin lesions. Okay. And the incubation period is 1 to 5 days, which ranges from 1 to 10 days. Okay. And the period of infectivity is 2 weeks from the onset of symptoms. Okay. And it has been seen that antibiotic therapy promptly terminates the shedding, and chronic carriers may shed organisms for 6 months or more. So if you find an active case and you start antibiotic, then the infectivity of the individual is decreased. Okay. The early you start the antibiotic, the early the infectivity or the period of infectivity decreases. Okay. Coming to clinical features, most of the individuals or most persons infected with this bacteria are asymptomatic or have mild clinical course. Okay. And only few of them have symptoms, and the symptoms may include respiratory diphtheria that may present with moderate fever, or exudative pharyngitis, that is sore throat and difficulty in swallowing, that may lead to sore throat and difficulty in swallowing, and a grayish white pseudomembrane. Okay. So this pseudomembrane can be over the tonsils, pharynx, larynx. Okay, this pseudomembrane covers the tonsils, pharynx, and larynx, and if you try to dislodge the membrane, then it bleeds profusely. Okay, so I can also show the picture of the membrane. So this is the membrane, a pseudomembrane that is seen in diphtheria. Okay, that covers your mainly soft palate, even the uvula, and your tonsillar area. Okay, and it may extend to your larynx even. Okay, this is greyish white membrane. If you try to dislodge it, then it will cause severe bleeding from the mucosa. Okay. So there are various type of diphtherias like like tonsillopharyngeal diphtheria, nasal diphtheria, or laryngotracheal diphtheria. Okay. So mainly it involves your respiratory tract. Okay. And laryngeal diphtheria is a medical emergency and it requires tracheostomy. Okay. So if there is laryngeal diphtheria, it will cause respiratory distress or even respiratory failure due to blockage of your respiratory tract, and it is an emergency and it requires tracheostomy to maintain respiration. Okay. There is also some clinical finding of bull neck appearance. Okay, and this bull neck appearance, I think I have the picture as you can see here. So this is a picture of bull neck appearance, and this is due to cervical adenopathy or cervical lymphadenopathy and edema around the mandibles. Okay, so this is called as bull neck appearance. In diphtheria there is lymph node enlargement, mainly the cervical lymph node enlargement, that gives rise to bull neck appearance like this. Okay. So inflammation of cervical nodes and swelling of the surrounding tissue gives to bull neck appearance. Okay. Other complications include cardiac complications like myocarditis, arrhythmia, and that may lead to cardiac failure, okay, or sudden cardiac death. Then it may also lead to neuritis like bulbar dysfunction leading to palatal pharyngeal palsies, okay, even facial palsies or oculomotor nerve palsy, and also it may lead to peripheral neuropathies. Okay. Pneumonias can occur in more than 50% of diphtheria. Okay, and in infants, otitis media and respiratory insufficiency are the most dreaded complications. Okay. So case definition of diphtheria is, case definition means it is used for your surveillance purposes, okay, epidemiological purposes. Like as you know that these are notifiable diseases. All the like communicable diseases or vaccine preventable diseases are notifiable diseases. Notifiable diseases means if you get a patient with either suspected case or confirmed cases of these diseases, then you have to notify it to the higher authority or the like SMO, that is surveillance medical officers, and these data are used for surveillance purposes, okay, epidemiological purposes. So these are notifiable diseases, and for that there is a particular case definition. So in which case you should suspect, I mean there are some criteria according to which you have to if the patient fulfills this criteria, then you will suspect that the child or the patient is having this particular disease. Okay. So a suspected case of diphtheria is defined as an illness of upper respiratory tract characterized by the following: that is laryngitis or pharyngitis or tonsillitis, and an adherent membrane or of tonsils, pharynx and or nose. Okay, so there should be features of laryngitis or pharyngitis or tonsillitis, and there has to be an adherent membrane of the tonsils, pharynx and on the nose, that you have the membrane that you have seen in the picture. Okay. So the pharyngitis and tonsillitis can present with fever, with pain and redness of the throat and the tonsils, whereas laryngitis, the symptom of laryngitis are hoarseness of voice and cough. Okay. And adherent membrane looks like this. Okay. It is called as a pseudomembrane. Okay. In the initial stage, there is isolated spots of grayish and whites exudate around the tonsil or the tonsillar and pharyngeal area, and after a few days these spots coalesce within a day to form a pseudomembrane that becomes progressively thicker. Okay. Initially it is there are spots, gray spots, and then it forms membrane which progressively become thicker. Okay. And it extends beyond the margins of tonsils into the tonsillar pillars, palate and uvula. So this differentiate from the streptococcal infection, where the membrane is limited to only tonsillar area. So in streptococcal infection also there is in streptococcal pharyngitis also there is a membrane, grayish white membrane, but that membrane is limited only to your tonsil, whereas the membrane of your diphtheria is extended beyond tonsils, that is into the tonsillar pillars, palate and uvula. Okay. And dislodging this membrane is likely to cause severe bleeding. Okay. So you should be very cautious while dislodging the membrane or while taking sample or throat swab. Okay. Other associated signs and symptoms include dysphagia, that is difficulty in swallowing, difficulty in breathing, headache, change in voice, that is hoarseness or thick speech, nasal regurgitation, serosanguinate nasal discharge, mainly in your nasal diphtheria. In nasal diphtheria there is serosanguinous discharge from the nose and there is excoriation of the upper lip. Okay. So this is called as bull neck diphtheria, in which there is massive cervical lymphadenopathy with edematous swelling of the mandibular region and surrounding area. This leads to bull neck diphtheria. Systemic manifestations of toxin we have already discussed: myocarditis, polyneuritis. Okay. And this myocarditis can lead to death if not given proper attention, okay, due to cardiac failure and arrhythmia. It also leads to bulbar dysfunction like parietal palsy or laryngeal palsy, oculomotor palsy or ciliary palsy. Okay. Coming to management or general principle management, the morbidity and mortality is still high in developing countries like India. Okay. Early treatment reduces the complications, mortality and even the transmission to other persons. Okay. Prompt initiation of the therapy on clinical suspicion should be done. You should not wait for the laboratory results for initiating specific therapy. Okay, as soon as you suspect a case of diphtheria, you should start antibiotics. Okay, and you should collect specimen preferably before starting treatment. Okay, and patients should be kept in a strict isolation. This you have to remember that it has very high communicability to susceptible individuals. So once you suspect a case of diphtheria, the patient should be isolated from other susceptible individuals. Okay. The case management has three main components. That is, one is antibiotic therapy, next is administration of diphtheria antitoxin and supportive care, and next is public health interventions that includes your immunization in the community. So effective vaccination is available against diphtheria, and antimicrobial prophylaxis of contacts, that is post exposure prophylaxis, PEP, okay, to the contacts. Okay. So the antibiotics of choice or drug of choice for treatment is penicillin or erythromycin. Okay. Penicillin is not used much nowadays due to its adverse reactions, okay, drug reactions and hypersensitivity reactions. But still, penicillin is the drug of choice, and also you can use erythromycin. Okay. So the penicillin that can be used are aqueous crystalline penicillin G, and the dose is 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh units per kg per day, 6 hourly, IV or IM. Okay. I mean 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh units per kg per day divided 6 hourly. Okay. Or you can use procaine penicillin, and the dose is, if the child is less than 10 kg, then the dose is 3 lakh international unit per day intramuscular, and if the child is more than 10 kg, then you should give 6 lakh international units per day intramuscular. Okay, for 14 days. And another alternative drug is erythromycin, and the dose is 0.5 gram 6 hourly for 14 days, and the dose of penicillin is also for 14 days. Okay, and erythromycin is also 14 days. In adults it is 0.5 gram 6 hourly for 14 days, and the pediatric dose is 40 to 50 milligram per kg per day 6 hourly. Okay, for 14 days. So advantages of these drugs are that they limit the further bacterial growth and limits carrier state. Okay. So once you start antibiotic, the bacterial load decreases, the symptoms decreases, and the transmission to other person also decreases, and also the carrier state you can limit. It also limits the carrier state. But the limitation of this antimicrobial therapy is that it has no impact on already established toxin-induced lesions. So if already myocarditis or neuritis has happened, then this antibiotic therapy will not relieve those symptoms. Okay. Next most effective therapy is administration of diphtheria antitoxin. Okay. And this diphtheria antitoxin reduces their case fatality rate. Okay. And these are hyperimmune antiserum that are produced in horse. Okay. It is administered either intramuscular or intravenous route, and early administration is recommended as it neutralizes free toxin. Okay. The earlier you administer, the better is the prognosis. Okay. The recommended dose for tonsillar diphtheria is 10,000 units, and for pharyngeal diphtheria it is 40,000 to 60,000 units, and for extensive diseases it is 1 lakh to 1.5 lakh units. Okay. So this is the recommended dose of diphtheria antitoxin, and you can repeat the dose if you think that it is not effective. Okay. Next is supportive care, again, which is very important in case of diphtheria. Close monitoring including regular ECG to monitor cardiac manifestations like arrhythmia and all due to myocarditis, and attention should be given to airway. Okay. Early interventions like pacemaker for conduction disturbances, drug for arrhythmias, and tracheostomy or intubation to ensure continued patency of airway, and mechanical ventilation, mechanical removal of the tracheobronchial membrane should be taken whenever necessary. Okay. So here are some prerequisites or conditions that you have to remember, that the window period from onset is 2 days to 4 weeks. Okay, for your your diagnosis. Okay, this is for diagnosis, and the type of specimen is throat swab or piece of membrane. Okay, either you can take a throat swab or you can remove a piece of membrane and you have to send for diagnosis for culture and all. Okay, and only one specimen is required for diagnosis, and the transport media for the specimen is silica gel or amines transport media, and the storage during transportation should be done at in 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Okay, so you should remove you should either take a throat swab or remove a piece of membrane, and you should transport it in silica gel or amines transport media and transport it in 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Okay. And as I have said, vaccines are available. Vaccine is available for diphtheria, and it is also included in your national immunization schedule. Okay, so I am not going to discuss the vaccines in details today. In next class or next to next class, I will be discussing immunization in details. Okay, I will be discussing all the vaccines in details, and in that class I will be discussing these vaccines in details. Okay, so for the time being, you remember that it is given in combination. In national immunization schedule, DPT is given, like diphtheria vaccine is given along with pertussis and tetanus. Okay, DPT vaccine. It is given at 6 weeks. Primary immunization is given at 6 weeks, 10 weeks, and 14 weeks. And booster dose is given at first booster is given at 15 to 18 months, and second booster is given at your 5 years. Okay, we will discuss it in detail in my immunization class. Okay, so to summarize diphtheria, it is caused by an exotoxin producing bacteria. A pseudomembrane is formed over tonsils, pharynx, larynx, and it is pathognomonic of diphtheria. Myocarditis and neuritis are common complications. Bacterial culture is gold standard laboratory test. Case management involves antibiotics, antitoxin serum, and supportive care. And public health interventions involves appropriate vaccination and prophylaxis of the contacts. Okay, and isolation of the patient. Okay, so next topic is pertussis or whooping cough. Okay. Pertussis is termed as whooping cough because the most common symptom of this disease is a severe cough that sounds like a whoop. Okay. That is why it is named as whooping cough. Okay. So, as you all know, it is an acute infectious disease of young children, and it is clinically characterized by fever and an irritating cough which gradually become paroxysmal with characteristic whoop, that is loud crowing inspiration. Okay. And that is why it is called as whooping cough. And in China it is also called as 100-day cough. Okay, so as you all know, it is caused by a bacteria, that is Bordetella pertussis, and some other agents also present with similar symptoms like Bordetella parapertussis in less than 5% cases. Even certain viruses like adenoviruses, parainfluenza viruses are also implicated in whooping cough, but probably they are coincidental and not the actual cause of whooping cough. Okay. So Bordetella are small fastidious gram-negative cocobacilli that colonize only in ciliated epithelium, okay, of mainly respiratory tract, and it is extremely contagious with attack rate of as high as 100% in susceptible individuals. Okay. So if a susceptible individual comes in contact with a case of pertussis, then there is a chance of 100% infection. Okay. It may be subclinical, the presentation may be subclinical, but the infectivity rate is 100%. The source of infection is a infected person, I mean a case of pertussis. Okay. And the infective material is nasopharyngeal or bronchial secretions. Secondary attack rate, as you have discussed, is as high as 100% who are exposed to aerosol droplets and at close range. And even after exposure, in individuals who are exposed to the case of pertussis, the infection, subclinical infection is as high as 80%, also in fully immunized and previously infected individuals. Okay. So if a person is immunized or previously exposed, then also there is a 80% chance that the person will be having subclinical infection, although they may not have severe infection, but subclinical infections. Okay. The hosts are primarily, it is a disease of like infants and preschool children, and high incidence is seen in children below 5 years, and it is seen more in females than males. Okay. Infants are susceptible to infection from birth because maternal antibody doesn't appear to give them protection, unlike measles. So in measles, what happens? The maternal antibody, which is transmitted from mother to the baby via placenta, that gives protection to the baby up to 9 months. Okay. So we immunize the baby, we give measles vaccination at 9 months. And the reason is the maternal antibody that the child receives from mother through placenta in uterus, that gives protection to the baby up to 9 months. Okay. But that is not the case with pertussis. Okay. These maternal antibodies doesn't appear to give them protection. Okay. That is why this pertussis vaccine is started at 6 weeks, okay, as early, very early in life. Okay. And there is no cross immunity with Bordetella parapertussis. That means if you have given a pertussis vaccine, that doesn't mean it will prevent parapertussis. Okay. Incubation period is 7 to 14 days, and it has the clinical feature has 3 stages. One is first is catarrhal phase, next is paroxysmal phase, and the third one is convalescent phase. Okay, we will discuss one by one. So in your catarrhal phase, there is no specific symptom, or I mean non-specific symptoms like cough, rhinorrhea, sore throat, and conjunctivitis, which may last from 0 to 2 weeks. Then the spasmodic or paroxysmal phase, where there is paroxysmal cough ending with characteristic whoop with post-toxic vomiting may be present. This lasts from 2 weeks to 4 to 8 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks. And then the convalescent phase, which lasts for months. Okay. We will discuss it one by one. So the catarrhal phase lasts for 1 to 2 weeks, and it is the most infectious period. Okay. The initial manifestations are indistinguishable from upper respiratory infections, like other upper respiratory infections. Okay. So there is low-grade fever, sneezing, lacrimation, or conjunctival congestion. Okay. Cough, chorea, and nasopharyngeal secretions may be present. But the specific feature of cough of your pertussis is that this cough doesn't improve in a few days, but becomes more severe and frequent with time, unlike other causes of cough. Okay. In like other respiratory infections, initially there is cough, but once you start treatment, the cough gradually declines and subsides. But in pertussis, the case is different. The cough of pertussis gradually increases in severity over the course of time. Okay. Next is the paroxysmal phase, which lasts for 2 to 6 weeks, and the cough progresses to episodic paroxysms of increasing intensity, ending with a high-pitched inspiratory whoop. So yesterday night I had shared a video, a link of a YouTube video with your CR Karthik, and I had asked him to share the link with all of you, and I hope you all have gone through that video. And that video shows the typical presentation of a child with whooping cough, pertussis. So you might have seen in that video that small girl, infant girl, she has severe or intense or aggressive coughing for a few seconds, and after coughing, when she tries to take inspiration, she produces a sound, a crowing sound, and that is called as whoop. And that is typical of your whooping cough. So this, after intense coughing for few seconds or few minutes, when she tries to inspire against the closed glottis, a sound is produced like this. So if you have gone through that video, then you might have appreciated this sound. At the end of that cough, she produces this type of sound, and that is called as whoop. And that is characteristic of your pertussis, because this type of cough, paroxysmal or spasmodic cough, can be present in some other diseases or other conditions, like say foreign body aspiration or in reactive airway diseases. So if the child has accidentally aspirated a foreign body into the trachea, then the child tries to expel it by coughing. So the child may have this type of spasmodic cough, severe cough, but the child will not have this whoop during inspiration, and this whooping is typical to your pertussis, that whooping sound. And this whooping is due to air rushing in during inspiration through a half open glottis or half closed glottis, whatever. But whoop may not be always present with apneic or cyanotic spells, especially in newborns and infants less than 3 months. They may not present with whoop. Instead, they may present with apneic or cyanotic spells. So the cough begins as a dry, intermittent, irritative hack, and it evolves into inexorable paroxysms that are hallmark of pertussis. Interrupted cough on a single exhalation. Chin and chest are held forward. Tongue is protruding maximally. Eyes are bulging and watering. Face purple until coughing ceases, and a loud whoop follows as inspired air traverses the still partially closed airway. Post-tussive emesis is common, and exhaustion is universal. So post-tussive emesis means after your cough, the child will vomit. This is due to increased abdominal pressure. When the child coughs so vigorously, there is increased pressure, and due to this pressure, the child may vomit after the cough. It is called as post-tussive emesis, and it is common in your pertussis. And definitely exhaustion is universal, because if the child coughs so vigorously, then the child will exhaust. The intensity, then comes the convalescent phase, in which the intensity and paroxysms of cough decreases gradually over 1 to 4 weeks. Vomiting also gradually declines. Appetite, general condition, and health gradually improves. But in infants younger than 3 months of age, the presentation is slightly different. They do not display the classic stages. Catarrhal phase lasts for only few days instead of 2 weeks, or is unnoticed, and the child is well appearing young infant who begins to choke, gasp, gag, and redden face. The cough may not be prominent, especially in the early phase, and whoop infrequently occurs in these infants. So whooping occurs mainly in infants older than 3 months. In infants younger than 3 months, whooping cough or whooping may not be the presentation. Okay, they present with usually apnea and cyanosis. Okay, so after a few episodes of coughing, they may develop apnea or cyanosis, and these may be the only symptom in infants less than 3 months. Okay, but the paroxysmal and convalescent phase in young infants are lengthy as compared to older infants. Okay. On physical examination in a child with pertussis, usually there is no definitive physical finding suggestive physical finding. Signs of lower respiratory tract disease are not expected unless a complicating secondary bacterial pneumonia is present. Okay. So if there is another secondary bacterial infection is there, then you can find some respiratory signs. But unless if there is only pertussis, there is no other clinical findings. Okay, apart from that symptoms, there is no signs. Okay. Sometimes conjunctival hemorrhages and petechiae on the upper body are common, and this conjunctival hemorrhage is due to increased pressure in the capillary due to coughing. So due to this vigorous or intense coughing, there is increased pressure, and due to this pressure, the capillaries in the conjunctiva and the skin ruptures, and there is conjunctival hemorrhage and even petechial rashes on your upper body part. Okay. Other complications include in respiratory complications, it can be otitis media, pneumonia, atelectasis due to intense coughing, emphysema, bronchiectasis, pneumothorax or pneumomediastinum, and these all can be due to secondary other bacterial infections. Okay, coexisting other bacterial infections. In neurological complication include seizures and encephalopathy, epistaxis and intracranial bleed or retinal bleed. Okay, seizures due to again there is hypoxia due to increased coughing and all, and epistaxis and intracranial bleeding is also due to increased pressure in the blood vessels due to coughing. Inguinal hernia and rectal prolapse can also occur due to increased abdominal pressure during coughing. Okay, vigorous coughing. Malnutrition due to decreased appetite and flare-up of TB can also occur. Okay. Now coming to case definition. So a suspected case of pertussis is defined as a person with a cough lasting at least 2 weeks with at least one of the following symptoms. Okay. So paroxysms of coughing, a inspiratory whooping, or a post-tussive vomiting, or without other apparent cause. Okay. So if a child person is having cough lasting for more than 2 weeks and having any one of the following, then the child or the patient is said to be a case of suspected pertussis. Okay. So the diagnosis of pertussis should be suspected in any individual who has a pure predominant complaint of cough. Okay. So you know the clinical definition, sporadic cases, and this clinical definition, by using this clinical definition, you can diagnose pertussis with a sensitivity of 81% and specificity of 58%. Okay. In infants younger than 3 months of age, as you all know, gagging, gasping, apnea and cyanosis or an apparent life-threatening event. Okay. So the differential diagnosis of prolonged cough may include adenovirus infection, endobronchial tuberculosis, inhaled foreign body, or reactive airway diseases. In laboratory diagnosis, if you do a complete blood count, you will find a leukocytosis with WBC count ranging from 15,000 to 1 lakh cells per microliter, and with lymphocytosis, absolute lymphocytosis. So it will be lymphocytic leukocytosis. Okay. And if you find absolute increase in neutrophil, that means you should suspect different diagnosis. Okay. In pertussis, there is increase in lymphocyte count. If you do differential count, then lymphocyte count will be increased. Okay, not neutrophil. And if you find increased neutrophil, that means you should suspect or you should think of other diagnosis. Okay. Chest radiographs may be normal, or sometimes it is mildly abnormal with perihilar infiltrate or edema, or maybe some atelectasis. Parenchymal consolidation suggests some secondary bacterial infection. Okay, parenchymal consolidation means suggestive of pneumonia, and pneumonia is not caused by your pertussis bacteria. It is caused by some secondary bacterial infection, other coexisting bacterial infection. Okay. There are various methods of confirmation of infection of Bordetella pertussis. You can identify the bacteria by either culture or PCR or by serology test. Okay, so culture is done of the nasopharyngeal secretion in Bordet Gengo medium, and PCR testing is also done on nasopharyngeal swabs. Okay, you can also test the antibody against the bacteria, and these are the most sensitive tests in immunized individuals, and these are mainly useful for epidemiological purposes. Okay, coming to management of pertussis. So you should first take general measures like provide adequate nutrition, provide adequate hydration, because the child having severe symptoms may not be able to take adequate like foods, and may not be able to drink adequate water, so the child will develop malnutrition and dehydration. So you have to maintain that, and you should avoid factors that are aggravating cough like extreme cold condition or dust or anything like that. The criteria for hospitalization is any like infant who is less than 3 months old and is a suspected case of pertussis should be admitted. Okay, if the child is less than 3 months and is suspected case of pertussis, he or she must be admitted. Okay, or hospitalized, and those between 3 to 6 months of age should also be admitted unless they have the paroxysms are severe. Okay, just a minute, I'm getting a call from emergency. हेलो, हाँ गुड मॉर्निंग, बोलो। रुको ना, मैं तुमको कॉल करता हूँ 15 मिनट बाद, मैं क्लास ले रहा हूँ स्टूडेंट्स का। तो ठीक है, मैं कॉल करता हूँ ना 15 मिनट्स बाद। And patients of any age who have significant complication should be hospitalized. Okay. The aim of hospitalization or the purpose of hospitalization is to assess the progression of disease and likelihood of life-threatening events at peak of the disease, to maximize nutrition, to prevent or treat complications. We have seen the complications, what are the complications of the pertussis, and to educate parents in the natural history of the disease, and to take care that in the care of that will be given at the home. So you have to educate the parents what care the baby requires at home. Okay. Here is the treatment protocol and post-exposure prophylaxis of a case of pertussis. Okay, so for treatment and also for post-exposure prophylaxis, these drugs can be used. Okay, and here it is given according to age group. So the primary agents are azithromycin and erythromycin, and you can use the alternative agents like clarithromycin and cotrimoxazole. Okay, so azithromycin is the best choice, as you can see here, because it can be used in any age group, that is even in infants or even in newborns, okay, less than 1 month. Okay. Whereas you cannot use other drugs in newborns. Okay, and the also azithromycin is very commonly available, and the adverse side effects are also less with azithromycin, okay, as compared to other drugs. So the dose is from 1 month to 6 months. The dose is 10 milligram per kg per day, once daily for 5 days. Okay, 10 milligram per kg per day, once daily for 5 days, from 1 month to 6 months. And after 6 months, it is 10 milligram per kg on day 1. Day 1 you have to give 10 milligram per kg on single dose, and from day 2 to day 5 you have to give 5 milligram per kg per day. Okay, and in adults the dose is 5 milligram on day 1 and 250 milligram per day from day 4 to day 2 to day 5. Okay, for next 4 days. Okay, so you can use other drugs like erythromycin, clarithromycin and all, and the dose of erythromycin is 40 to 50 milligram per kg per day, 6 hourly. Okay, for 14 days. Okay, and this clarithromycin, and you can take a screenshot of this PPT slide. Okay. And as you can see that clarithromycin and your cotrimoxazole cannot be used in newborns. Okay. Coming to supportive therapy or adjunct therapies, there is a question mark on role of beta 2 agonist nebulization, corticosteroids on any IV immunoglobulins. There is limited data on their efficacy. Although like nebulization with adrenaline, some studies has shown that nebulization with adrenaline reduces the airway edema and helps preventing the respiratory distress and all. Okay. Cough suppressant antihistaminic agents should be avoided. You should not suppress the cough. Okay. And the most important thing is isolation of the suspected case of pertussis to prevent transmission, because it has high infectivity rate. Okay, and the close contacts should be given secondary post exposure prophylaxis with erythromycin. Okay, and regarding actually we are running out of time, so regarding vaccination I am not discussing about the vaccines today. We will discuss in details during my immunization class. Okay, so for your knowledge, you should know that in your national immunization program, I have already discussed that it is DPT is given at 6, 10 and 14 weeks, the primary dose, and booster dose are given at 15 to 18 months and second at 5 years. Okay, so next topic is your neonatal tetanus. Actually, I think you have a ENT class after this at 11 am I think. So should finish it very early. So next topic is your neonatal tetanus. Okay. So tetanus is a Latin word and it is derived from Greek word tetanos, which means muscular spasm, or literally a stretching or a tension. Okay. So it means either muscular spasm or stretching or tension. Okay. So again, as you know, it is a bacterial disease caused by Clostridium tetani, and it is a spore forming strictly anaerobic gram positive bacilli. Okay. And the spores of this bacteria survives in normal disinfection and heating. Okay, it is very resistant to disinfectants. Okay, and spore contaminating the wounds germinate to vegetative cells. Bacilli produces extremely potent neurotoxin called as tetanospasmin. Okay, so when you get contaminated with the spores of this organism, especially in your wounds and all, then the wound area which are devoid of proper oxygen supply, because it is an anaerobic organism, so it grows in areas with less oxygen supply, especially in wounds and all. So it germinates into vegetative cell. Now this cell produces two toxins. One is tetanospasmin and another is tetanolysin. Okay, but the tetanospasmin is the important toxin that that produces the your symptoms. Okay, tetanospasmin. So this tetanospasmin blocks the inhibitory neurotransmitters like GABA and glycine at the presynaptic end of the neuromuscular junction, leading to muscular stiffness or spasm. So due to blockage of this inhibitory transmitter like GABA, it causes prolonged contraction of the muscles, leading to stiffness and spasm. Okay, so this is the etiopathogenesis of your neonatal tetanus, and it is highly infectious, but it is not communicable. I mean, it is not transmitted from person to person. There are different forms like maternal tetanus, It can be due to like unclean delivery or abortion and poor postnatal hygiene. Okay, and neonatal tetanus occurs due to unclean instrument to cut the umbilical cord, or umbilical stump covered with contaminated material or cloth. Okay, so if the delivery is not hygienic, okay, unclean, then that can lead to your neonatal tetanus. Okay. Incubation period is 3 to 21 days. It ranges from 0 to 60 days. Okay. As you all know that India has been, the WHO has certified India, that India has eliminated neonatal and maternal tetanus by 2015. Okay, so India, like this maternal and neonatal tetanus is eliminated from India since 2015. Elimination doesn't mean that there are no cases. Elimination means like the incidence is less than 1 case per 1000 live births. Okay, for tetanus the elimination is defined as when the cases are less than 1 case per 1000 लाइव बर्थ. चलेगा ना अभी? हाँ चलेगा, बैटरी में चलेगा ना? ठीक है. तो मैडम आ गई हैं क्या? सर्विस मैडम आ गई हैं क्या? सो टाइम 10 मिनट, चलिए 11 बज गया है. ओके, मैं ख़त्म हो जाएगा 10-15 मिनट में. 10 मिनट कर लीजिए. ठीक है. So क्या बोल रहा था? Yes. So India has been certified as like that. India has eliminated neonatal and maternal tetanus, and it is possible by like widespread immunization of pregnant women with 2 doses of tetanus. So nowadays you must be seeing that all the pregnant women are immunized with tetanus toxoid. Okay, and that helps prevent your neonatal as well as maternal tetanus. Okay, and that is the reason that in earlier days, like I have never seen maternal or neonatal tetanus practically, but what my teachers, my professor used to say, that they have in their time, like say 10 years back, 20 years back, the incidence was very high. But now due to this widespread coverage of tetanus immunization, the incidence has decreased quite low, and even below 1 case per 1000 live births. Okay. The spores are prevalent in soil, especially in warm and moist areas. In countries with low immunization coverage, majority of cases are birth associated. Okay. Tetanus in children and adults following injuries are also constitute considerable public health problem. So आप लोग देखें होंगे किसी को कभी कुछ भी चोट होता है तो आके बोलता है कि मुझे टिटनस लेना है. ठीक है. So tetanus, even adults, not only neonates, all the individuals should be covered with tetanus toxoid in periodically. Okay, so as to prevent tetanus. Okay. So the clinical features and complications includes that it presents as a generalized parasitic disease. Okay, and the spasm initially involves this face and neck muscles, then it gradually involves the neck, your trunk, your abdominal muscles and your extremities. Okay, and it is called as descending paralysis. It is like descending paralysis. Okay, initially it involves your facial muscles, okay, your masseter muscle, and which leads to trismus or rhizus sardomicus. Okay, then there is a spasm of back muscles leading to opisthotonous posturing. Then it may cause generalized tonic seizures like tetanospasms, or spasm of the glottis leading to sudden death. Okay, so it causes like generalized muscle spasm. Okay, but the like distinguishing feature is it starts from the face. So this first symptom is locked jaw. Okay, the baby is unable to open the mouth properly, the baby is unable to suck. Okay, so there is respiratory difficulty and all. Then gradually this spasm progresses to neck, your body and all. Okay, and the case fatality rate varies from 10 to 70% in treated patient. and it is almost 100% in lack of optimal care. Okay, so it has very high case fatality rate even in patients who are given proper care. Okay. For diagnosis, there is no definitive diagnostic laboratory test, and diagnosis is entirely on clinical basis. Okay. So the case definition is any neonate with a normal ability to suck and cry during the first 2 days of life, and who between 3 to 28 days of age cannot suck normally and becomes stiff or has convulsions or spasm or both. Okay, so the symptoms start between 3 to 28 days. Okay, because the incubation period is 3 days, after 3 days. Okay, so usually the clinical picture doesn't start before 3 days. In the initial 2 days the child is normal and the symptoms start after that. So if the baby is normal in the initial 2 days or initial few days, then after that the child is unable to suck, become rigid, develop stiffness and all, then it is a suspected case of neonatal tetanus. Okay, the spasm initially involves there is increased tone in the facial muscles like locked jaw or grimace. It leads to inability to suck, stiffness in the neck, shoulder and back muscle. Subsequent involvement in the other muscle produces rigid abdomen and stiff proximal limb muscle. These spasms occur repetitively and may be spontaneous or provoked by even a slightest stimuli. And that is the reason that if a suspected case of tetanus should always be kept in an isolated room and in a quiet room. So you should prevent any stimuli, like any physical stimuli or any like visual, like any loud sound or any stimuli. Okay, so if you give any stimulus to the child, then it will provoke your spontaneous muscle spasm. So you should prevent giving any stimulus to the child, and you should keep the child in his quiet room without much sound and light. Okay. Actually, I had a video. I don't know whether it will play or not. I think it will not play. इसलिए मेरे लैपटॉप में प्ले हो रहा था, तो आई थॉट कि यहाँ पे प्ले होगा. सो मैं भी इसका लिंक आपको भेज दूंगा. आई थिंक यहाँ पे प्ले नहीं हो रहा है ये. ओके, मेरे लैपटॉप में प्ले हो रहा था, तो आई थॉट कि यहाँ पे प्ले होगा. इट इज़ वीडियो एक्चुअली ऑफ ए चाइल्ड विथ टिटनस. Okay, I will send you the link after the class. Okay. So coming to case management, first coming to general principles. Mechanical ventilation and benzodiazepines reduces mortality and morbidity of tetanus patients admitted in a hospital. So the death in the case of neonatal tetanus is mainly due to respiratory failure. Okay, there is paralysis of respiratory muscle, there is paralysis of the glottis. Okay, so this leads to respiratory failure and the death. Okay, so mechanical ventilation is the mainstay of treatment of your tetanus patient, and benzodiazepines like your diazepam and all help in your relieving the spasm and your jerking movements. Okay, and also they like give sedation. So these are the mainstay of treatment in severe cases. Mortality in developing countries is due to lack of access to appropriate medical care. Okay. Antibiotic of choice is intravenous penicillin or metronidazole. Okay, and you can also administer tetanus antitoxin. Okay, it reduces mortality. Okay. It can be either administered parenterally or intrathecally. When administered intrathecally, it neutralizes the toxin within the nervous system. Okay, so two types of tetanus antitoxins are available. One is equine derived, that is horse antiserum, okay, anti-tetanus serum, and another is human tetanus immunoglobulin. Okay, so in supportive care, chlorpromazine and phenobarbital helps in your preventing spasm and other movements. Intravenous diazepam can also be used for this spasm, prevention of spasm and all. And intramuscular paraldehyde where there is no ventilator facility. Okay. Therapeutic approach depend upon the source available. Okay, if you have ventilatory support, then you have to give ventilatory support, and depending upon the availability of a resource. Okay. Regarding the immunization and antitoxin, I think we will discuss in your next class. I mean your immunization class. Okay. Actually, I think you have your ENT class after this. So we have to finish this class now. Okay. So thank you all.